that and think about our competitiveness as a state.
Well, and it's tough because there hasn't been an absolutely clear perspective given on what the difference is between, what Dayton is suggesting and what the Republicans are suggesting. Is there any way to quantify how Minnesota would be different next year or in 5 years under a plan that was Dayton's, where they tax the wealthy more, versus a Republican budget that makes cuts, including cuts to healthcare programs like Minnesota Care? Is there any, those are a couple examples, but
sure.
Is there any way that you guys can quantify? Maybe it's I'm sure some people would say that the cuts plan would lead to a better situation 5 years from now than the one we're in right now. But I want to see what you guys think in terms of, is there any way to paint the picture for people out there what the difference would be?
Well, I would say that the state economist, Tom Stinson, has done that, as well as 2 or 3 other economists in the last week. They have said if we do an all-cuts approach, here would be the impact on the entire state. And if we do other approaches that include revenue, and again, it doesn't necessarily have to be income tax, although I do think that's what they studied. They said the outcome for the entire state would be better with the income tax increase than an all-cuts budget. That's what the economists have said within the last 7 days. So unless something contrary is brought up, and I haven't seen research to the contrary yet, I'm thinking, those are the folks we have to trust as people who specialize in those areas.
And Senator Stenstrom, I suspect you might have a different perspective.
Well, probably so. In terms of the cuts, Senator Han, as our chair of Health and Human Services, you sort of mentioned, I think, that area a little bit. That's not going up 22% like the forecast would say it should, given past statutory obligations and so on that have been incurred, but it is going up 6%. And so the question is, at a time like this, given the recession that we're in, and given the pain that people are living in, can we really afford a 22% program? And I think not. And 6%, I think, is within the realm of reasonableness for most people. So as we think about this all cuts and so on, in that area it's not all cuts. In K-12 it's not all cuts. Certainly in some of the areas we've had to cut. There's no question about it. But this is not necessarily totally an all cuts budget.
And I'd like to add, I think Dave raises some good points. I think one of the things we need to get beyond as a legislature and as a community is, rather than talking about the ideology of all cuts, and I apologize, I use that term as well as a comparison, but we need to get to what services do we want to provide? And I often hear government spending is out of control. I think those are just rhetoric. I think what we need to look at is within budgets, and Dave has mentioned Health and Human Service, the spending, it's not that state spending is out of control, it's that healthcare costs are rising out of control, and how can the state adjust to that? One way would be to kick people off health care. Well, that doesn't solve the problem of rising health care costs. That's just a way to manage the state budget. And I think one of the things we've tried for the last several years, and I think we should continue to do, and hopefully nationally, Minnesota can't solve this alone, is what can we do to bend the curve on health care spending, not just cut people off service. That's not the answer. That will have people using the emergency room and actually increase costs.
Well, and some make the argument that when you cut health care costs, or when you cut people off the health care programs, the unintended consequence of that is that then they do what you say. They either don't go in and get preventative care. We've heard these arguments for years. They either don't go in and get preventative care, or they go to the ER, and that causes everyone's costs to go up. Well, that means individuals are paying more for health insurance. Their taxes might not be as high, but it's like beating down one thing and another thing pops up.
Right. And so again, it's not about, are we spending X amount of dollars on health care? It's what can we do to lower the impact of those health care costs by they talk about it as bending the curve in health care spending. And it's not just a state of Minnesota issue, it's a nationwide issue, and we need our health care institutions and providers to help us. And certainly Mayo Clinic locally has been one of those partners that has stepped up, and I think they continue to make efforts in that regard.
I think Representative Norton, I think she makes a good point. And so, like, what's changed in our state budget maybe over the last 30 or 40 years, it is the cost of health care and the obligations that we've taken along those lines. And we say it, I guess I'll just say it here, it's virtually unsustainable. And I think, and Representative Norton can correct me, I think Tom Stinson, our state economist, economist rather, has a slide that I think says unless you get this under control, it's going to consume the entirety of your state budget by 2033. Well, I mean, it gives us a little time, but not all that much time in terms of trying to address that. And can we fix it just in Minnesota? It's perhaps more of a national thing as well, but we've got to get these things under control, or none of the other things that we value are going to be affordable.
Well, and we've talked about that. I mean, people have been talking about healthcare
Yeah.
costs for decades
Yeah.
now, and it seems like the issue that we just accept. I mean, if the cost of another product just was going up exponentially, normally those things they'll solve themselves through the market. But with healthcare, it seems like we all need healthcare, so it seems like it's a little bit different, and it seems like there's nothing we can do to prevent it, and that everyone, including lawmakers, sort of accept it and say, we have to deal with this, and you have to deal with it practically. But I mean, I don't see people standing up and saying, okay, is somebody making too much money in healthcare, or is
Well, and
sort
I
of
think,
playing tough
yes.
love on healthcare? I don't see that.
And I think it's one of the most difficult decisions I think as a society we can have, is making decisions about who gets health care and how much they get. No one wants to have that discussion. And until we start having some really serious discussions about end-of-life care, when it's been brought up nationally, you heard death panels. As soon as you bring up these topics, they become so heated, and so there's such difficult discussions about what is quality care. And I think many of us in the baby boom generation, of which Dave and I are both a part of, want quality care. We've worked our whole lives. We expect good health care, and we want it. We want, if our hip hurts and we don't want to use a cane, if we can get a hip replacement and go back and play golf. I mean, I don't play golf, but a lot of people do. So I think those are the kinds of discussions. They're very, very difficult. They're quality of life, and they're moral and ethical decisions and discussions. And so I think rather than having those hard discussions, sometimes we step back, and then we get in the place we are now, where it's either cut people off or not. And it's not that simple. I think Dave would agree with that.
Okay. Anything you want to say, Senator, about the health care?
Well, it continues to be a big issue for us. I guess we've kind of gone through that. We, I think, tend to want to try to at least relate to it in terms of how do we fix it. More individual personal responsibility in terms of one's life, in terms of one's habit. We tend to pick a lot on the insurance companies, and maybe to some extent that's deserving, but I don't think we're going to get solved there as well. I think, at least we think, it's all about personal responsibility, personal choices, controlling costs through an educated population that can use health care wisely. And I think, as we all know, we go in right now and we sit down with the doctors and we go through this list. We're going to have this test, this test, this test, and that one. And for the most part, perhaps somewhat appropriate, but we tend to just trust our doctors and take the bill.
Well, we can't be. Every individual can't be an expert on
we can't,
healthcare.
But I think we just have to be a little bit more educated about when we use it, and perhaps to some extent even question our doctor about the necessity of these things.